Good evening.
Good evening. Mr. Colon, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The hiring committee in this room and across New Mexico has many concerns about improving our state. We are looking for the person who is best qualified to represent us in Santa Fe. You have 2 minutes per question and will be signaled when you have 15 seconds left to conclude your answer. First question. The state auditor's role is to assure the proper use of taxpayer money by auditing and examining the financial affairs of every state agency as well as state contracts. What makes you believe your experience qualifies you for this job?
Well, Carla, thanks for the question. Thanks to all the sponsors for today. And it's great to be back here in this interview process. Folks said, are you really going to go to that Business Coalition interview? I said, you betcha, I'd never miss it. Because it is a fair interview, it's an appropriate format, and it's one that's well attended and appreciated by the community. So let me talk to you about my qualifications. I've been a lifelong New Mexican. I went down to New Mexico State University after graduating from Los Lunas High School. And at New Mexico State University, I got a finance degree. After being in Las Cruces, I opened several businesses. I've been an entrepreneur and met my wonderful wife of 23 years who got me focused like a laser beam after marriage. And she said, you're going to not just finish your finance degree at New Mexico State, you're going to go to law school like you've always talked about. And that worked out great. I came to UNM 20 years ago to go to law school, and I've been practicing law in every part of New Mexico for the last 17 years. I've done everything from plaintiff's work, which is my main area of practice, to business transactions, mergers, and acquisitions. And the work that I've done in the finance area makes me perfectly situated. And my work in the law is particularly important for this office because, as we know, 12 years ago, we elected the first lawyer in New Mexico to the office of the state auditor. And he really transformed that office from a rubber stamp office to an office of substance because he understood the capacity the office had with its subpoena power. It was really the first time that you had substantial waste, fraud, and abuse, and really corruption being uncovered by the Office of State Auditor, then transferred to the Attorney General, and then prosecuted. So for me, I think the background that I've had in finance and in law is really a marriage of the credentials of the last 2 state auditors that were elected in New Mexico, and I believe that it will serve me well in the office over the course of the next 4 years.
Thank you. This next question, we opened it up for people to provide questions, and this one came to us from all over the state. It is of deep concern to the people of the state. Are there any audits you would recuse yourself from because of close friendships, business ties, or other conflicts of interest? And can you give us an example of a time that you have gone against your own political party?
That's a great question. And conflicts of interest are critical. And one of the things about being a lawyer is you understand concepts of conflict, you understand the concepts of appearance of impropriety, and you take those ideas very seriously. And so, having been in New Mexico my whole life, I know a lot of folks, I've got a lot of friends. But in the event that I have a close personal relationship with an individual who may be under investigation after audit, I would recuse myself from that transaction. In the situation that we have in New Mexico, the way the Office of the State Auditor operates is there are about 1,300 audits that are conducted each year of governmental entities and organizations that fall under the audit rule each year. The vast majority of those audits are done by what we call independent public accountants. And that list of independent public accountants that are obtained by each of those entities by RFP process is approved by the Office of the State Auditor. So the State Auditor doesn't typically do an audit. The audit findings by those IPAs or independent public accountants are then submitted to the Office of State Auditor for review, approval, request for further testing, orders of special audits, or things of that nature for additional work to be done on those audits. But clearly, after having practiced law for 17 years, having never been accused of, in front of the state bar or by my clients of having been engaged in conflicts of interest, I'm very proud of that, and it's something that I will continue to protect when elected to be state auditor. For the Democratic Party, having been former chair of the Democratic Party, there are times that I have gone in a direction that's different than my party, whether it be for judicial races, or whether it be for some legislative races over the year. I remember that I testified in Santa Fe on behalf of a very controversial individual who had spent a lot of money to defeat Democrats the election cycle the year before. And for those of you that are deeply engaged in politics, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Matt Chandler. And I testified for his appointment as a regent. And I paid dearly for that amongst the party loyal, but I had the courage of my convictions because I put that relationship and that friendship and my belief in him ahead of party politics.
Thank you. Brian, past audits have found irregularities with New Mexico's high-risk pool and a company owned by 2 state political officials. This audit was started by the prior auditor and has been continued by the current auditor with resistance from both the high-risk pool and the company. If you are the auditor going forward, will you continue to push for state and private financials and tax returns from both agencies to confirm they are following state regulations?
Sure, so this is a real fundamental question that I think we can ratchet up, which is the Office of the State Auditor is in the best position to reestablish the trust between the citizens of New Mexico and their government. That trust has been breached. It's been severely damaged, whether it's because we've got a former Republican Secretary of State who's now a convicted felon who was forced to resign from office, or a Democratic state senator who's a convicted felon who was forced to resign from office, or whether we have elected officials who are now indicted. Voters of New Mexico have lost faith in government. This office has to be the office that calls for transparency, engagement. So for any organization that comes close to falling under that act, we've got to look at it very, very carefully and make sure that if we do have the authority to provide the audit and to call for the audit, that we actually engage in it. In a specific situation here with the high-risk insurance pool, what's been filed in the courts is called a DEC action, a declaratory action, to have the courts determine whether or not that entity is exposed and subject to the Audit Act. And by the time I become auditor, the courts are going to make that choice. And I will absolutely follow the ruling of the court. And should the court make a decision and it's under appeal, we'll continue to take the position that the lower court holds.
Thank you.
You bet. I have a few more seconds just to be very clear. Does everybody understand where we're at on that case? The case was filed in court. One side says we're subject to the Audit Act. The other side says they're not. And the judge gets to decide. And I get to follow that ruling if I'm elected auditor. And I intend to do so, regardless of the outcome.
Thank you. There has been a lot of scrutiny and controversy recently over foundations or nonprofit organizations that receive tax dollars or are otherwise tied to tax-funded entities. The UNM Foundation, funding for expensive trips, is one example. Some say these nonprofit agencies are not government agencies, so they are not under the authority of the state auditor. What is your position on this issue?
So this is personal to me. For those of you that know me, you know that I served as president of the UNM Alumni Association, and I was very much engaged in the conversation about this kind of separation of the foundation from the university. I was the student body president there for 2 terms at UNM when I was in law school, and then continued to serve through the Alumni Association as an advisor to the Board of Regents. And I can tell you that I felt like it was an uncomfortable set of circumstances when we did this break-off. And we had the Lobo Club, we had the foundation, we had the university, and I think there was potential for exposure and risk. And in fact, it turned out to be true. I know that when I was president of the Alumni Association, there was a movement to try and take the $10 million that the Alumni Association had raised and move that over to the foundation. And we maintained our independence, and we fought very diligently for that. And the reason was I don't have full faith in the setup that we have currently at UNM right now. And obviously, that concern that I have was well placed. And I wish I could tell you that I believe that this was over, and that we've seen the last story on the front page of the Journal about what went on in the athletics department and what went on in the foundation. Unfortunately, I don't think that's true. I will continue to learn about more things that were inappropriate, illegal, and that will have to be prosecuted. Now that work started in the auditor's office, and that was started under Auditor Tim Keller. And I intend to hold nonprofits that receive taxpayer dollars accountable for their actions. And any time that they don't want to be held accountable for those actions, I will also use the court system or use the legislature to correct any issues or lack of clarity in the law that they are subject to the Audit Act. Because again, this is the office that has the opportunity to rebuild the trust in government that's been lost by the citizens of New Mexico.
Thank you. Your final question, in 2 minutes or less, please tell the hiring.
If I haven't used my lifeline, do I get to use it? Just checking.
Sorry, we didn't provide it.
All right.
In 2 minutes or less, please tell the hiring committee why you believe you are the best candidate represent New Mexicans as the state auditor?
Sure. So I think I see a lot of faces in the room that I'm familiar with, but several that I'm not. And so I think it's important for individuals when they choose a leader to understand the lens they look through. And the lens I look through is one that's very familiar to New Mexicans. It's a lens of growing up, starting here in Albuquerque, in elementary school, then moving down to Valencia County, getting into Section 8 housing, and growing up in poverty, like so many New Mexicans. When I buried my father as a teenager, I was an island unto myself. I didn't have a single blood relative in New Mexico. But community made sure I didn't fall through the cracks. When I was that teenager at New Mexico State University, I had one thing: my father's desire and dream, when I buried him at the age of 49 from muscular dystrophy, that I would be the first in my family to go to college and break the cycle of poverty. The reason I continue to stand here before you and ask you to interview me and decide if I'm the right person for the job is because I've got a debt to my community. I've got a debt to New Mexico because one generation out from that poverty, my son is now on a presidential scholarship as an Albuquerque High Bulldog studying biomedical engineering at George Washington University. That doesn't happen without community support. So for me, I tell my son that I've got a debt of gratitude that I'll never be able to repay fully, but I'm going to die trying. And part of that is being a public servant. I'm pretty good at primaries. I'm 2 for 2 in primaries. I got to close the deal on a general election. And I'm hoping to do it right now. And I'm hoping to do it this cycle. And I'm hoping to take the credentials that I've talked about tonight. And I'm hoping to take my integrity. Because people may like me or not, but there are very few people in the last 20 years in my public life that question my integrity. And I'm very, very proud of that. Because I've got that 21-year-old son, and the only thing I get to leave him is my name. And right now, that's a pretty good gift, and I'm not going to take it away. My name is Brian Paul. I hope to be your next state auditor. Thank you. I just want to say that the coalition knows that corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse doesn't have party affiliation. So this is the one office that really isn't about politics. It's really not about party. It's about good government. And I appreciate you letting me be here today.
Thank you, Brian. The hiring committee, the voters of New Mexico, will let you know on November 6th if you have been selected for the position of New Mexico auditor.
This is where you can do